Hi there. I'm a historian. If you're having trouble sleeping tonight, I think my story might just help you drift off. For now, all you need to do is close your eyes. And if you have headphones nearby, go ahead and put them on. Let my voice and the sound of rain carry you gently into sleep. Now, then, let's begin. The first breath of morning drifts into the small stone house before the sun ever crests the Acropolis. It carries with it the scents of dust olive oil and the faintest trace of smoke rising from distant hearths. In a narrow bed of straw, wrapped in a simple woolen hymation, a man stirs Nikandros, a free Athenian citizen, but no nobleman. A potter's son, a father himself, now in the kind of man who blends into the whitewashed walls of this city. His house is modest: 2 rooms, rough stone floors, clay-plastered walls, and a courtyard no larger than a fishing net stretched full. But it is his, and in Athens that means everything. His wife, Philonica, has been up longer than he. She moves quietly near the hearth, mixing grain with water in a small terracotta pot, feeding the fire with dried fig branches, keeping the children from waking too early. The youngest, a boy not yet 6, snores, softly curled next to his sleeping sister, beneath woven blankets that smell of sun and smoke. In the corner, a servant girl, barefoot quiet. Enslaved since childhood, begins sweeping yesterday's dust into a shallow basket, careful not to make noise. Her name is Lysimele. She was born in Corinth. No one here talks about how she arrived. Nikandros rises. His back aches from yesterday's labor, but he does not complain. Complaints are for those who have time to linger, and he has none. The day will begin, as most do, with calloused fingers, stiff joints, and the weight of responsibility pressing down like a soldier's shield. He scratches at his beard, dips his hands into a clay basin of water warmed by the hearth, and breathes deeply as the chill snaps him awake. Breakfast is plain: a hunk of barley bread, a few olives soaked in vinegar, and watered wine poured from a black figure crater. The children eat beside him in silence, already trained in the rhythm of Athenian mornings, quiet, quick, efficient. Words come later with the market. Outside, the faint sound of hoofbeats echoes down the street. Somewhere, a priest chants to Apollo, while a neighbor coughs up the last of his sleep. Athens, always alive. Philonica presses a small cloth-wrapped pouch into his hand, figs and cheese for later, and kisses his forehead. "Don't forget the amphora," she whispers. "It's cracked again." He nods and steps out into the light. The city greets him like an old friend, worn loud and unbothered by anyone's troubles. The streets are uneven but familiar. White dust clings to his sandals. From every doorway comes the sound of life: women grinding grain craftsmen, hammering copper dogs, barking merchants, shouting praises of their figs or fabrics. The Agora still sleeps, but only just. Soon it will pulse like the heart of a great beast. Nikandros walks past temples he cannot enter, painted walls that fade more each year, and statues whose eyes seem to follow him. He passes a young hoplite in training spear, resting on his shoulder armor still too shiny to have seen war. The boy nods respectfully. Nikandros nods back. He's not a warrior, but he's a citizen, and that matters more. On his way, he stops briefly at a small roadside altar dedicated to Hermes. A splash of wine, a muttered thanks, a token offering of bread. Not because he's devout, but because Athens is old, and you don't survive long here by ignoring the gods. Even the skeptics nod to Olympus. The sun is climbing now. The stones underfoot begin to warm. Nikandros adjusts his hymation across his shoulders and keeps walking. The Agora is calling. It is a strange thing being common in a city that worships greatness. Athens loves its philosophers, generals, orators, dramatists, gods. But most of all, it loves itself. And yet, for every name etched in marble, there are 1,000 like his names. No one will remember stories. No one will carve lives that matter only because they help the others shine. But he doesn't resent it. His life, humble as it is, belongs to the polis. And in return, the polis grants him voice dignity, and most precious of all choice, the right to speak at the assembly, the right to own land, the right to teach his son the laws and the myths. No tyrant breathes here anymore, not openly. This is the soil where democracy grows, even if it does not always bloom. As he rounds a corner near the potter's stalls, the city opens before him like a play on the world's most intricate stage. There are actors everywhere, some cloaked in robes of fine linen, others in rags and dust, but all playing the roles fate handed them at birth. And Nikandros. He is content to be among them, to work, to eat, to laugh when he can, and to pass through Athens like a river, passing through stone, shaping it gently without leaving his name. By the time he reaches the edge of the Agora, the noise has risen. Chickens cluck in woven cages. Bronze tools glint in the sun. A merchant yells something about Euboean fish. Philosophers debate beneath the portico, and children dart between legs with olive branches in their hands. He smiles slightly and steps forward, merging with the crowd. It is morning in Athens, and the day has only just begun. The Agora of Athens is not merely a marketplace, it is the city's pulse, the center where the physical, political, and spiritual arteries of Athenian life all converge and collide. As Nikandros steps beneath the long shadows of the Stoa, the air thickens not with smoke or incense, but with voices. Dozens of them. Hundreds, perhaps. Men shouting prices, debating philosophy, preaching politics, laughing, arguing, whispering rumors. The scent of crushed olives, worn leather, and human sweat swirls around him. He's not just stepping into a plaza, he's walking into the very lungs of Athens. To his left, a man sells amphorae, shouting about their Cretan clay. To his right, a trio of young boys, barely more than children, pass out leaflets written by their fathers' local politicians, eager to sway the assembly. Behind them, an old woman hunched like a question mark sells small gods carved from bone Artemis with broken hands, Apollo with fading paint, Athena without her owl. Everything has a price, and everything in some small way has power. Nikandros makes his way toward a familiar stall, the one run by Diodoros, a grizzled fishmonger with one eye and the sharpest tongue in the city. "Nikandros," he bellows, "you look like someone cursed you in your sleep." The joke lands the way all Diodoros's jokes do, loud, unnecessary, and warmly meant. Nikandros grins and picks out a modest catch, placing a few obols on the weathered table without argument. In Athens, you haggle when you can afford to waste time. Today, he cannot. As he tucks the fish into his satchel, he hears a voice rising over the others, not from a stall, but from a step above, standing on a flat rock beside the temple of Hephaestus. A man in his 30s, broad-chested and clean-shaven, speaks with passion. The Persians rebuild the sea, grows dangerous again. And what do we do? Squabble over taxes while Sparta sharpens its blades, heads turn. Eyes narrow. Some nod. Others scoff. Nikandros pauses for a moment. He doesn't know the speaker, but the words stir something familiar. Fear, perhaps. Or duty. These days, it's hard to tell them apart. A soft tug on his tunic draws his attention. A young girl, barefoot, dirty, curious, offers a fig in exchange for a coin. He gives her one, not because he wants the fruit, but because her eyes remind him of his daughters. She smiles, bows awkwardly, and vanishes into the crowd. Moving on, Nikandros passes a circle of men seated beneath a colonnade. Among them is an older figure, wrapped in a pale blue himation eyes, closed, as if listening to music only he can hear. This is Philostratos, one of the city's lesser-known philosophers, but a good man by most accounts. Today, he speaks of moderation, of sophrosine, the Greek virtue of self-control, balance, harmony. A man who drinks only to forget will never remember what it means to be free, he says quietly, then sips from a small clay cup. Nikandros doesn't stop. He has no patience for long speeches today. But still, the words follow him, as all good words do. Further in the crowd thickens. Here, the Agora becomes chaotic, like a storm of commerce and ego. Rich citizens in white robes stroll with bored expressions, fanning themselves as slaves carry baskets behind them. Craftsmen yell over each other to advertise their tools. Hammers from Thebes, chisels from Corinth, ropes from the islands. A group of traveling actors in colorful costumes juggle near a well-performing half a scene from a comedy about Dionysus drunk in the underworld. The crowd laughs. A coin clinks. The actors bow and move on. Nikandros slows as he approaches the steps of the Bouleuterion, where the city council gathers. He won't go in. It's not his day to speak, and he's not an orator, but he watches as others do. Some stride with confidence, others with caution. Inside those walls, decisions are made that echo far beyond them. Taxes raised alliances, formed citizens, exiled. The people rule here, yes, but only if they bother to show up. A loud cry slices through the air, meeting of the assembly. All citizens prepare. A procession of young men, Ephebes' new initiates to manhood, marches past with spears resting on their shoulders. Their faces are flushed with pride, or maybe fear. This is Athens their blood might yet stain Marathon Plataea, or some distant shore not even named yet. Nikandros turns and heads toward the edge of the square, where an older man sells scrolls, not books exactly, but rough papyrus sheets covered in wax and charcoal ink. News, philosophy, law, poetry. Most are copied by hand. Nikandros browses and buys one on the recent debate over naval funding. His taxes are involved after all. By now the sun rides higher, and the Agora glows with white heat. A flute player sits beneath a tree, playing a melody that twists like smoke. Two men argue near a food stall over whether the Delian League should exist. A dog sleeps in the shade of a broken column. And above it all, rising like a god's crown, the Acropolis gleams. Nikandros exhales. He's seen this all before, and yet every day it's different. This is not just a city. It is a conversation, and he is lucky to have a voice in it. The sound of the bronze bell echoes across the Agora like a summons from the gods themselves. It's time for the ecclesia, the assembly. Not every citizen will attend, but for those who do it is more than a civic duty. It is a declaration of presence, of power, of voice. And today, Nikandros is among them. He makes his way out of the market square, winding up a slight incline toward the Pnyx, the sacred hill west of the Acropolis, carved out specifically for the gathering of Athens' citizen body. The sun blazes high now, and the climb is slow sweat collecting at the back of his neck. Around him walk men like him, fishmongers, potters, bakers, stonemasons. No nobles, no slaves, no women, just citizens, those born of Athenian blood with the right to vote, to speak, to shape the destiny of their city. The Pnyx is nothing like the temples. It's not elegant. There are no marble columns, no statues of gods. Just a wide-open slope, terraced with stone benches and a platform at the center, the bema, from where orators will speak. Already hundreds have gathered. Some sit in silence. Others talk in clusters. A few shout about the matters of the day. War, trade, taxes, The trial of a dishonest grain merchant. Rumors of rebellion in one of the islands. Nikandros finds a seat toward the middle, not too close, not too far. He squints against the sun as the first speaker climbs the bema. It's Philocrates, a silver-tongued politician known for his long-winded speeches and oiled hair. Men of Athens, he begins, voice rising over the chatter. Our strength lies not in our fleets or our walls, but in our will to act as one body. Applause. A few groans. The assembly is awake now. For the next hour, Nikandros listens. Speaker after speaker rises, some with conviction, others with desperation. A young man, barely of age, proposes a new tariff on imported olive oil to fund repairs to the long walls. An older general counters with warnings about unrest in Thrace. A philosopher insists on reforming jury pay, quoting Solon. It is chaotic, imperfect, and utterly alive. Nikandros doesn't speak today. He rarely does. But he listens, and that too is part of democracy. He leans in when someone challenges a powerful landowner. He nods when a voice from the back reminds everyone that Sparta remains a shadow on the horizon. He frowns when the assembly laughs off a petition from wounded veterans. And when it comes time to vote, he walks to the designated section, "No secret ballots here." Each man stands in the area that represents his choice. For or against. Yes or no. There is no hiding in the Pnyx. After the vote is counted, a herald announces the result. A new decree is passed, minor perhaps, but it will change the taxation of harbor merchants. It may ripple through the city, affecting prices trade, maybe even jobs. Nikandros feels the weight of it as he rises. His vote, small, ordinary, brief, was part of something greater. In this city, no one rules alone. As the crowd disperses, the conversations shift to other matters. Theater, religion, gossip. A rumor that a former general has gone mad and now claims to be Heracles reborn. Someone laughs. Another spits. Athens may be the cradle of democracy, but it is also the forge of scandal, satire, and skepticism. Nikandros walks down the slope, the sun warm on his shoulders. He's tired, and he still has work to finish. But for a moment, he feels proud. Not because he has power, but because he has a place, a voice, a role, however small, in the great experiment that is Athens. Back in the Agora, a different energy hums through the streets. The midday heat presses down, sending many to shaded corners and fountains. Children play with hoops and sticks. A street poet recites lines about lost love and foolish gods. A group of women gather near a well veiled and laughing softly. From a distance, the Parthenon watches, all silent, eternal. Nikandros buys a small honey cake and eats it slowly beneath a fig tree. He watches as a crippled veteran argues with a merchant over the price of wine. He sees two boys sword fighting with sticks, while their mothers scold them in mock serious tones. He hears the fluttering of a dove's wings and the faint sound of a lyre from somewhere unseen. He thinks about his father, long dead now, who taught him that Athens wasn't perfect, but it was free. He wonders what his son will learn when he's old enough to join the assembly. He thinks of the Persians, the Spartans, the people across the sea who know nothing of what it means to gather with neighbors and shape the world with words. Then, as the bell tolls again in the distance, signaling the end of the assembly, Nikandros stands, dusts off his hymation, and begins the slow walk home. It's only midday in Athens, and the day is far from over. As Nikandros makes his way back through the narrow, sun-baked streets of Athens, the scent of roasted lamb and crushed herbs lingers in the air. Children's laughter bounces between stone walls, and somewhere nearby a woman sings while pounding grain in a mortar. The city never stops moving, and neither does he. There's no such thing as a restful afternoon for men like him, not when the work is tied not just to survival, but to legacy. His small home is quiet as he returns, but the faint clang of clay against stone alerts him. Philonica has begun preparing the evening meal, and the servant girl is cleaning the courtyard. His son, Ariston, sits under the shade of an olive tree, carving something into a block of soft wood with a dull blade. The moment Nikandros enters, the boy perks up, eyes wide. "Did you vote, father?" he asks. Nikandros nods, handing him a piece of honey cake saved from earlier. "And I listened more than I spoke," he says with a wink, which is often wiser. In a world shaped by rhetoric and bravado, it's important for the boy to learn that wisdom isn't always loud. Without changing, Nikandros steps into his small workshop, an alcove just off the courtyard, filled with tools, worn benches, and half-finished pottery. He's no master sculptor, but his hands are steady, and his craft is respected in the neighborhood. On the bench sits a cracked amphora, the one Philonica reminded him about. He dips a cloth into warm water, wipes the dust away, and inspects the damage. A clean fracture near the base, not fatal, but tricky. He mixes resin and dust, murmuring under his breath, focused like a priest before a sacrifice. Each pot, each bowl, each oil jar is more than a vessel. It is a piece of the city's rhythm, part of the engine that feeds, stores, and sustains. As he works, his daughter Myrene brings him a jug of watered wine. She's still small enough to believe her father is as mighty as Theseus. She waits quietly until he takes a sip, then rushes off to help her mother. In Athens, daughters aren't expected to do much outside the home, but Philonica teaches her to read when no one is watching. A woman's mind, she says, can be sharper than any spear. Nikandros agrees, but says little. Some things are safer, kept in the walls of your own house. Later, as the sun begins its slow descent, casting golden hues across the rooftops, Nikandros puts aside his tools and washes his hands in the basin. He joins his family for dinner in the courtyard, sitting on low stools around a stone table. The meal is simple, but hearty lentils with garlic and onion, a few boiled greens, dried figs, and a small portion of fish. They eat slowly, gratefully. Wine is passed around in a single shared cup, and stories are traded like currency. Ariston asks about the Persian War. Myrene wants to hear about Athena's owl. Philonica smiles and shakes her head. No politics at the table, she insists, but listens closely, all the same. After the meal, Nikandros and the children sit on the edge of the courtyard, while Philonica clears the dishes with Lysimele, the servant girl. The stars begin to emerge, first 1, then 3, then dozens, until the sky becomes a quiet ocean of light. A neighbor plays a flute softly from across the way. A dog barks once, then curls up for the night. The city breathes slower now. Nikandros wraps his arm around Ariston's shoulder. One day, he says, you'll walk up the Pnyx with your own ideas, your own voice. The boy nods solemnly, already dreaming. But don't just speak to be heard. Speak to make Athens better. The fire in the brazier crackles gently. Philonica joins them, sitting beside him. They say little, and yet everything is said. In this brief golden hour between labor and sleep, the world feels balanced. The empire may be small, their names unimportant, but their lives are rich in the things that matter. The city doesn't need to remember them, because they remember each other. And that is enough. The night had been quiet, almost too quiet. Nikandros awoke before dawn, not to the cry of roosters or the clang of the neighbor's gate, but to something different, an unease in the air, like the city had exhaled and forgotten to breathe again. He stepped into the courtyard, barefoot, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. The stars had just begun to fade, and a pink line teased the horizon. Across the rooftops, a crow cawed. A bad omen, his father would have said. But Nikandros was not a man of omens. He believed in what he could touch repair shape with his own hands. But as he walked toward the well near his street's edge, he saw them two men in dark hymations posted just beyond the shadows whispering. One carried a scroll, the other a short wooden staff. Nikandros recognized them at once. They were Rhetores' court heralds and enforcers of Athens' laws. He tensed. By the time he returned home, the sun had barely risen, and his wife was already up sweeping the courtyard. Her brow furrowed when he told her. "They only show up when something's wrong," she muttered. "And no one calls them for good news." They shared a look, silent, heavy. This was not a day that would unfold gently. By mid-morning, the whispers had turned to murmurs, and the murmurs into shouts. Something had happened in the assembly the day before, an accusation, they said. A prominent traitor, Demetrios, had filed a claim against a group of citizens for slander and subversion. His name, reputation, and cargo had been mocked in public. A firebrand speaker had called him a coward in the face of Persia and a thief in the face of Piraeus. It wasn't much, not in any city, but in Athens, where words could start wars or end careers, it was everything. And Nikandros, they said, had nodded in agreement. Just once. Just enough. At first, he laughed it off. "I barely even listened," he told Diodorus at the fish stall. "And I certainly didn't speak." But it didn't matter. A rival faction needed a scapegoat. And a craftsman with no patron, no protection, was an easy target. By noon, he was summoned to appear before the Heliaia, the people's court. He didn't even get to finish his bread. The court was held outdoors, as most things were in Athens. The sky did not pity him. It was blindingly blue, the sun hanging like an unblinking eye. The jury was massive, drawn from citizens of all classes, their expressions ranging from bored to curious. Nikandros stood before them with a dry throat and aching knees. He had no advocate, no written defense, only his voice. And so he used it. "I am not an orator," he began. "I am not a noble. I am not the kind of man who dines with generals or sleeps beneath painted ceilings. I am a potter. I mend what is broken. And if I must defend myself, I do so not with flourished words, but with the same care I give to every crack, every shard, every piece of this city we all build together." He told them the truth, that he had listened, but not spoken, that he had no quarrel with Demetrios, that if he had laughed at anything, it was likely the absurd price of imported figs. Some jurors chuckled, others yawned. Then Demetrios took the stand. The man was tall, polished, theatrical. He stood with the troublemakers, he declared. He did not stop the slander. He encouraged it. And by doing nothing, he did everything. It was a clever line. Nikandros felt his stomach drop. The court recessed for deliberation. As he waited, sweat beating down his spine, a boy he didn't know handed him a fig. "My father says you're a good man," the boy whispered. "He voted for you." Nikandros nodded, heart too heavy to speak. The verdict came at dusk. Not guilty, no fine, no exile, no punishment, but no apology either. Just freedom, for now. As he left the courthouse, he passed Demetrios, who did not look at him. The man had already moved on to his next target, his next game, his next ambition. Nikandros didn't hate him. Not really. He just pitied him. A man so full of hunger, he could never be fed. He returned home feet sore, soul tired. His children rushed to greet him. Philonica kissed his cheek. "It's done," he told her. She nodded. They sat together that night, eating in silence, the fire casting soft gold across the walls. No speeches, no arguments, just breath, just being. And somewhere beyond the city's edge, the stars blinked on again, unconcerned, unimpressed, eternal. The dust had barely settled from the court proceedings, but Athens didn't pause for long. The city was always moving, always shifting like the tide against Piraeus's docks, predictable in rhythm, but wild in energy. And for Nikandros, after the storm of accusation came an unexpected breath of peace. A festival was coming. The Anthestia, a 3-day celebration in honor of Dionysus, the god of wine madness and joy. It was a rare time when even the poorest Athenian could laugh too loud, drink too much, and forget, just for a little while, the weight of democracy and debt. And so, like the rest of his neighbors, Nikandros prepared not just with food and drink, but with spirit. The first day, Pythagogia, was about the opening of the wine jars, the New Year's vintage. Nikandros brought out a clay vessel he'd saved for this exact moment, sealed tightly since the last harvest. He cracked it open in the early morning, the sharp, sour scent of fermentation rising like incense to the gods. His son Ariston wrinkled his nose and grinned. "It smells like goat's breath," he joked, and Nikandros laughed, a real laugh, the kind that shook off weeks of anxiety. They poured a few cups, not for themselves at first, but for Dionysus, splashing some onto the earth in offering. Then came the taste, strong, a little wild, but warm as fire. The kind of wine that could make you bold or foolish, or both. The courtyard came alive. Neighbors gathered. Musicians plucked strings and beat hand drums. Women wore wreaths of ivy. Children chased each other between tables. There was no politics, no court rulings, no market haggling, just music, wine, and storytelling. Nikandros told the tale of how Dionysus once turned pirates into dolphins. Philonica sang a song she hadn't dared sing in public since her youth. Even Lysimele, the servant girl, recited a riddle that left everyone stumped. For that one day, they weren't citizens or servants. They were revelers, bound by laughter and myth. The second day, Choas was stranger. The drinking contests began not in raucous parties, but in a quiet, almost sacred way. Each man drank from his own cup in silence, racing only against time. It was a ritual, not a game. Nikandros sat with other men in a neighbor's house, solemn and focused, downing his chouse in one steady gulp. Then another. Then another. It was believed that the dead walked among the living on this day, and that silence kept the world balanced. Outside, children dressed as ghosts. Doors were smeared with pitch to keep evil out. And all across the city, the line between life and death blurred just for a few sacred hours. Nikandros didn't see a ghost that day, but he felt one. His father's voice perhaps whispering through the rustling olive leaves, or maybe just memory awakened by wine and ritual. He sat under a fig tree, staring at the stars, remembering stories from long ago of gods who wept of kings, who fell of ordinary men, who built empires with calloused hands and stubborn hope. He closed his eyes and listened. On the third day, Kitroi the city turned again, the Day of the Dead. Families cooked panspermia, mixed grains and seeds offered to Hermes and the restless souls. Nikandros and Philonica rose before dawn, boiling lentils, barley, and herbs into a simple stew. No meat, no garlic, just remembrance. They left bowls at the doorway, not to eat, but to give to ancestors, to spirits, to the thin, unseen world that pulsed just beyond sight. The city grew quiet. No markets opened. No legal cases were heard. It was a day for mourning, yes, but also for gratitude. As Nikandros walked the empty streets that afternoon, he passed others like him. Heads bowed, eyes soft. A boy placing flowers by a well. An old woman whispering names to a clay urn. A man scattering flour on a grave. He visited his father's resting place near the edge of the city, where the earth was dry and the wind never stopped blowing. He knelt, poured a little wine, placed a sprig of thyme. "I nearly lost my place this week," he whispered, "but I held it. I hope that honors you." No voice answered, just the rustle of leaves and the long silence of those who no longer speak. That evening, as the sun dipped low, the city began to breathe again. Slowly, carefully. The living had honored the dead. The balance had been restored. Nikandros returned home tired, but full not with food or wine, but with something deeper. A sense of rhythm, of being part of a pattern that stretched far beyond himself. A pattern older than laws, older than politics. Something sacred. He sat with Philonica on the roof, watching lanterns sway in the windows of their neighbors. Below, laughter returned. A flute played. Somewhere a couple argued. Life resumed. Athens resumed. "Do you think the gods ever grow tired of watching us?" she asked. Maybe he said, "But I think they love the effort." And together they watched the stars blink on, like they had for 1,000 years, and like they would long after they were gone. Morning crept into the city of Athens once more, brushing the marble edges of the Acropolis with the color of ash and gold. Nikandros was already awake. He hadn't really slept. Something about the festival lingered in his chest like a glowing coal. Not the wine, not the music, but the feeling that life itself was dancing too close to something ancient, something he couldn't quite name. Maybe it was the silence from his father's grave. Maybe it was how easily his life had almost unraveled in the courts. Or maybe it was simply the weight of being a man in a city of gods, warriors, and thinkers, forever trying to be enough. He left his home early, under a sky still heavy with mist. Philonica was still asleep, her hand resting near her cheek like a statue at rest. Ariston murmured in a dream. Nikandros stepped over a sleeping dog in the courtyard and passed quietly through the gate. He had no plan, just the need to walk. The Agora was already waking up. Stalls creaked open. Merchants lit small braziers. A chorus of bartering voices began to rise with the sun. But Nikandros didn't go there. Instead, he drifted toward the edge of the marketplace, where the cobblestones gave way to a shaded square lined with olive trees and stone benches. It was there beneath a crooked fig tree that he first saw him. The old man in the gray chiton barefoot, standing in the dust and talking to no one in particular. At first, Nikandros thought the man was mad. He gestured to the air, laughed at silence, scowled at invisible arguments. But then he noticed the group gathering around some youths, some elders. A few with the sharp eyes of scribes. They weren't mocking him. They were listening. The man spoke slowly with the calm rhythm of someone who had all the time in the world and none to waste. "You say you know what justice is," he said. "But what do you mean by justice? That which pleases the strong, that which preserves peace, that which avoids punishment." He smiled not kindly. If a man is punished for telling the truth, is he unjust? Or is the city? Nikandros leaned against a column, arms crossed. The words stirred something in him. The speaker pointed to a boy in the crowd. "Tell me, young man, what is courage?" The boy stumbled. "It's not being afraid." "No," the old man said, "because fools feel no fear. Is a drunkard courageous because he charges a spear with an empty jug?" Laughter. Then silence. "Courage," he continued, "is knowing fear, but acting with wisdom. It is standing firm, not because you are unafraid, but because you understand what is worth fearing more than death." Nikandros felt something click. It was like watching a pot take shape from nothing. Just words, but somehow they carved something real in the air. Someone asked the man's name. "Socrates?" He replied with a shrug. "A stonecutter's son, like many of you. Nothing special." Nikandros stepped forward after the crowd began to thin. Socrates looked at him, eyes sharp but not unkind. "I'm no student," Nikandros said suddenly, feeling foolish. "Just a craftsman, a father, a man trying not to break." Socrates nodded. "The city stands on men like you, not the generals, not the poets, the quiet builders. What weighs on you today?" Nikandros hesitated. "Then everything feels like it could vanish. Reputation, safety, even my own words. I didn't do anything, and still they nearly ruined me." Socrates tilted his head. "Then you know how fragile justice is. That is wisdom." "I don't want wisdom," Nikandros muttered. "I want peace." The philosopher smiled, eyes sad. "And what if peace requires wisdom first?" They talked until the sun was high. About power, about the courts, about whether men could truly be good in a world that rewarded clever lies more than quiet truth. Before parting, Socrates placed a hand on Nikandros' shoulder. "Live as if your choices matter, even if the city forgets them. Because you will remember, and your children will remember you long after your name fades from the Agora." Nikandros walked away slowly, thoughts like wild horses in his head. The rest of the day passed in a strange calm. He returned home and worked on a commission, an amphora for a merchant's wedding gift. His hands moved by memory, but his mind was far away, circling questions like vultures. What did it mean to be just? To be good? To be ordinary in a city that worshipped greatness? At dinner, Ariston asked a question. "Father, if you had to choose between being liked and being honest, what would you pick?" Nikandros smiled. "I'd rather be remembered rightly by a few than wrongly by many." And Philonica, without looking up from her bread, said softly, "Then teach him how to carry both." The fire crackled. The sky darkened. Another day in Athens folded like a scroll, its ink still wet, its meaning still uncertain. But for the first time in weeks, Nikandros felt like he could breathe again. Not because the city had changed, but because he had. The city of Athens had many hearts, its courts, its marketplace, its temples. But perhaps none beat louder than the stone bowl carved into the southern slope of the Acropolis, the theater of Dionysus. There, words became war masks, became men, and the soul of the city was bared beneath open sky. On this particular morning, after the chaos of the festival and the quiet thunder of his encounter with Socrates, Nikandros found himself clutching two tokens for the theater, one for himself and one for Ariston. His son had never been before. It was a rite of passage, not just to witness a play, but to confront the mirror the city held up to itself. In Athens, theater was not simply for amusement. It was sacred. It was dangerous. And sometimes it was revolutionary. They left before sunrise, walking along streets already buzzing with anticipation. Bakers shouted orders. Women lit oil lamps in doorways. Strangers exchanged predictions about the performance. "It's Euripides," one man whispered, as though speaking of an oracle. "He'll make them weep and curse the gods in the same breath." The theater loomed ahead like a waiting colossus, vast rows of white stone, curving like a ribcage around the flat stage below. Thousands of Athenians pressed toward the entrances, from rich nobles in purple-dyed cloaks to slaves accompanying their masters, all equal for a day before the altar of Dionysus. Nikandros led Ariston through the crowd. They took seats near the middle, close enough to see the actors' movements, far enough to avoid the worst of the heat. The stone was cold beneath them. A breeze swept down from the Parthenon above. Then silence. The priests entered first, bearing offerings and garlands. They poured wine-chanted prayers. The smell of incense drifted across the air. The performance was about to begin. A single figure walked on stage wearing a towering mask with exaggerated eyes and a painted mouth. His voice, amplified by the design, rang out like thunder in a canyon. This is the story of a man who defied fate and paid the price. Nikandros knew it immediately. The tale of Orestes, the boy who avenged his father's murder by killing his own mother, only to be hunted by the Furies. A story older than most temples, raw and bleeding with questions. Is justice the same as revenge? Do the gods forgive what men cannot? Ariston leaned forward, eyes wide. As the play unfolded, Nikandros barely noticed the sun climb the sky. He was lost. The actors were not actors. They were curses and ghosts, and grief-given voice. The chorus chanted their rhythm like a heartbeat. The Furies slithered across the stage in black veils, hissing madness. Orestes screamed. Apollo whispered. The city held its breath. At one moment, the actor playing Orestes collapsed in the center of the stage, covered in dust. Crying out, "I did what was right, and now I am nothing." A man behind Nikandros murmured, "That's Athens." Another whispered, "That's all of us." By the final scene where the gods debate whether Orestes should be freed or punished for eternity, Ariston clutched his father's arm. "Will they let him go?" he whispered. "I don't know," Nikandros replied, voice thick. They did, but only after long argument, only after the goddess Athena intervened, only after the audience had been taken to the edge of despair and returned with something like hope. As the applause thundered through the theater, Nikandros looked at his son's face, flushed, awed, confused. "It was just a story," Ariston said. "No," Nikandros said. "It was our story, in a different mask." They walked home through crowded streets where the conversations echoed the themes of the play. "She had to die," someone said. "She killed Agamemnon." "But he sacrificed their daughter," another voice replied. "Who's innocent in this world?" Nikandros didn't answer. His thoughts circled like hawks above the city. Was he Orestes? Was he one of the silent chorus too afraid to act? Was he the judge or the judged? That night, he sat by the fire with Philonica and Ariston, telling the story again, not from the stage, but in his own words. He left out none of the blood, none of the betrayal. But he also didn't soften the ending. It was Athena, he said, who told them there must be an end to vengeance. That justice must live in reason, not rage. "Is that real?" Ariston asked. "Do gods talk like that?" "I don't know," Nikandros said. "But people do. And sometimes that's enough." As they prepared for sleep, Philonica touched his hand. "You look like you've been to war." He laughed softly. "Just the theater." But inside, something had shifted. Not everything was fixed. He was still poor. The courts were still dangerous. Demetrios still walked free. But now he understood something else. The battle for a just life didn't always happen with swords, or even with speeches. Sometimes it happened on dusty stages, beneath open skies, in the hearts of those who watched and wept. Sometimes the fight was in the remembering, and Athens, for all her flaws, never forgot. Days passed. The city returned to its rhythm's marketplaces, bursting with noise courts, brimming with complaints, and the slow, steady chisel of daily work continuing as if time itself was carved from marble. For Nikandros, the routine was both comfort and cage. He rose early, gathered his tools, and spent long hours hunched over amphorae and craters, tracing lines he had traced 1,000 times before. But something inside him had shifted. He could still feel the words of Socrates, the cries of Orestes, and the look in his son's eyes when Athena rendered her final judgment. Ariston had changed too. The boy who once asked simple questions, how to fire clay, how to choose a pigment, was now asking why men lied in court, or why Athens had slaves while praising freedom. Nikandros tried to answer, but his words often stumbled. And when they did, Ariston would nod, not in agreement, but with a kind of quiet disappointment that stung more than argument. One evening, after a long day in the workshop, Nikandros returned home to find Philonica unusually quiet. She sat near the hearth, hands folded, staring into the flame. "He's spoken with the philosopher again," she said without looking up. Nikandros didn't need to ask which one. "He says he wants to study." "Study," Nikandros echoed. "Philosophy," she said. "With Socrates. With the others." Nikandros sat down slowly. The fire cracked. Outside, someone shouted about fresh figs. A dog barked. Did he say why Philonica turned to him? He said, "He wants to ask better questions, not just learn to paint pottery." Nikandros felt a strange tightness in his chest. Part pride, part fear. "But what does that mean?" he asked. "Will he work? Will he earn? How does one feed a family with questions?" Philonica said nothing. Later that night, Ariston approached him. No hesitation, just the quiet resolve of someone who had already rehearsed his speech. "Father," he said, "you taught me to work with my hands, to hold steady, to be honest. But what if there's more I need to learn, not just about how to make things, but why things are the way they are?" Nikandros looked at his son, not a child anymore, not quite a man, but hovering on the edge of both. "Do you think I regret my life?" he asked. "No," Ariston said, "but I think you've asked questions no one answered, and I want to try." The silence between them wasn't angry, just heavy. A silence of history, of inheritance. Finally, Nikandros spoke. "When I was your age, I thought of being a soldier. I dreamed of the Spartan front of glory. But my father needed hands, not heroes. So I stayed. I worked. And I built something strong. I made a life. For you? And now you want to leave it." "I don't want to leave you," Ariston said. "I want to build something different. Not better, just mine." Nikandros closed his eyes. Behind the lids, he saw the faces of men at the Agora arguing over shadows and truths. He saw Orestes weeping in the dust. He heard Socrates asking what justice really was. He thought of the amphora he had just completed a gift for a wealthy merchant's wedding. It was flawless, the lines perfect, the image of Theseus slaying the Minotaur bold and clear. But what story would it hold truly if no one asked why Theseus had to kill, or whether the beast in the maze had once been a boy? "Then go," Nikandros said quietly. "But don't forget the clay. Don't forget the heat that shapes it." Ariston smiled. "I won't." That night, Nikandros returned to the workshop alone. He stood in the lamplight, touching each tool with reverence, his father's chisel, his own favorite brush. He picked up a lump of raw clay, held it, and then slowly he began to mold. Not a vase, not a crater. Something different. A face. Not heroic. Not divine. Just human. Rough brow. Curious eyes. A son's face. A father's memory. The clay bent beneath his fingers, just as life had always done. And as he worked, he realized something strange and powerful. His legacy wasn't in the amphorae sold to merchants or the coins buried in jars. It was in questions, in moments, in a boy who dared to look past the market stalls and ask the gods for answers. And maybe that was enough. The sun rose slowly, casting long shadows across the white marble and stone of Athens. The city stirred with a hum that felt different from the days before. Today, the people would gather at the Pnyx. A vote was to be held on new grain laws, on foreign policy, maybe even on whether a certain general would be granted more power. It hardly mattered which issue specifically. What mattered was that it was a day of ecclesia, the assembly, and that meant the very soul of the city would speak. Nikandros felt the weight of it before he even stepped outside. There was a current in the air, not unlike the moments before a storm. As he wrapped his chiton and buckled his sandals, he looked at Ariston, who was gathering scrolls and tying them with a leather cord. Going to Socrates, Nikandros asked not accusingly, just quietly. Ariston nodded. He's meeting with some students before the assembly. Nikandros raised an eyebrow. You planning to vote with philosophy instead of law? I can't vote yet, Ariston said with a faint smile. But I can listen. Nikandros said nothing. Then he reached into a clay jar near the door and pulled out a small wooden token, his identification for voting. He held it for a moment. The thing was ordinary, worn smooth by time and sweat, but it was more powerful than any weapon he'd ever held. It granted him a voice. It meant he mattered. He slipped it into the fold of his chiton and left the house, walking with Ariston through the narrow lanes that wound toward the Pnyx like veins to a beating heart. As they climbed the slope, the great platform of the assembly came into view. It was not grand, not like the Acropolis, not like the Agora, but it was sacred. It was simple. A rock-hewn stage, a podium called the bema, and open air all around, as if the gods themselves leaned in to listen. Thousands gathered, filling the terraces carved into the hillside. Men of all classes, farmers with dirt still under their fingernails, merchants in bright cloaks, veterans with scars, both visible and buried. They argued. They laughed. Some shouted before the speaker even began. A herald raised his arm. Citizens of Athens, we begin. The first speaker stepped forward, arguing passionately in favor of increased military presence in the northern provinces. The next opposed him, warning of tyranny cloaked as security. Then came the merchants demanding better trade routes. A poet spoke on freedom. A farmer reminded everyone of the cost of war, not in coin, but in sons. Nikandros sat near the edge, listening. He didn't always understand the rhetoric. Some men used words like swords slicing with precision, others like hammers pounding until the crowd roared. But every voice had weight, even his. He remembered Socrates' words, live as if your choices matter, even if the city forgets them. When his name was called, he hesitated. Then he rose and walked slowly toward the bema. This was not something he did often. He was not known for speeches. He was known for pots, for honest work, for paying debts on time. He stood there in the light, looking out over the sea of faces, some familiar, most not. I am Nikandros, he said, a potter, a father. A murmur rippled. I'm not here to argue numbers. I'm here because I nearly lost my name last week over a lie in court. And because my son wants to study philosophy, not pottery. And because my wife believes in quiet strength. And because this city, our city, gave me something worth defending. He paused, then added simply, don't forget the small men. We are the clay. We hold the shape of the city. He stepped down. Some clapped. Others returned to their arguments. But in that moment, Nikandros felt something shift, not in them, but in himself. He had spoken. He had shaped something. Later that night, the family sat together again. No fire this time, just oil lamps and the soft hum of cicadas. Ariston recited part of a poem from Euripides. Philonica was mending a tunic. Nikandros carved gently into a new amphora, not a commission, just a gift. He etched 3 figures, a boy with a scroll, a woman with a spindle, and a man with a pot. Around them, Athens rose temples and courts, theaters and homes. Ordinary, sacred, alive. He didn't know if his name would last, but the life he'd lived that would echo. As the Athenian stars blinked into view, one by one, a hush fell across the city. From the Acropolis to the poorest alley, the day was done. For Nikandros, it had been a day like any other, and yet a day that had quietly changed everything. There had been no war, no fire, no great betrayal, just thoughts, conversations, a boy asking difficult questions, a man speaking his truth, a family holding together in the shifting winds of a restless democracy. That is the hidden brilliance of ancient Athens. Its greatness was not only carved in marble or shouted in battle cries. It pulsed in the lives of ordinary people-men like Nikandros, who never wrote plays or led armies but who voted crafted raised children and dared to wonder if the world could be more just. Their names were rarely recorded in stone, but their hands shaped the city. Their stories, though fragile, survived in the very clay they molded and the values they passed on. And maybe that's the truest legacy, not heroism writ large, but humanity lived deeply. So, as we look back across thousands of years from our modern world, filled with screens and noise, we can still hear them if we listen. The sound of a potter's wheel turning, the echo of sandals on limestone, the crackle of a fire shared by three voices, father, mother, son. And in that moment, we are reminded Athens was not only a city, it was an idea. And that idea lives on whenever someone speaks truth, questions power, or teaches a child to think for themselves.